Sorry about that, babe.
I was wrong about Eternal Ring. Back in the summer of 2018, I took my first dip into the vintage catalog of FromSoftware by playing Eternal Ring on my PS4. That's right, I played Eternal Ring even before I covered Kingsfield 1 the following year. And don't get me wrong, I liked the game, I enjoyed my time, I did my old school style like 3-minute review for it, and I gave it a 7 out of 10. And if you do want to see that review, unfortunately for me it is one of my better performing videos on my channel. I'll make sure to link it in the pinned comment and description below for you. That being said, after playing through it again recently, I don't have a clue why I gave it a 7 out of 10. And I figured, you know what, this game deserves a little bit more of a deeper dive and a glow up on my end, so let's re-review it. At the end of my last review, I said that I wasn't going to return to the Island of No Return anytime soon, but it's been 6+ years, so why not? Eternal Ring is a first-person RPG developed by FromSoftware and published by Agetec in North America, released on the Sony PlayStation 2 on October 26th of the year 2000. Eternal Ring was part of a wave of PS2 launch titles, which also included fellow FromSoftware RPG Evergrace, which, yeah, I still need to play and cover that too. The story. The elders of the largest country in the western continent, Angaria, dispatched a group of knights to a place called the Island of No Return. The king was a young man named Ian. While inquiring for the reasons of the dispatch, the elders didn't bother to reply. Gillian Morgan, the loyal leader of the king's retinue, was worried about the happenings and decided to look into things himself. He remembered utterings about a ring possessing eternal power. From there, he approached King Ian and was like, "Hey, my son Cain is ready to go." And a few days later, a boat departed from Angaria to the Island of No Return with Cain Morgan holding a sealed scroll from King Ian. This is where you take over as Cain and the story unfolds. And yes, the opening in-game cutscene features some truly so bad it's good voiceover work, which I'll touch on later, and we're off. Honestly, the story of Eternal Ring's pretty cool. I enjoyed the twists and turns throughout, and I was pretty captivated. Again, despite some rather shoddy voice acting and questionable cutscenes at times. And honestly, if you loosen up a little bit, I think you might have the same feelings. Graphics. For being a PlayStation 2 launch title, this game is actually pretty good looking. In many areas, the colors are extremely vibrant, and in others, they are dull and drab when they need to be. With a wide variety of areas to traverse, Eternal Ring does a great job making things memorable visually. Whether it be the vibrancy of the research team headquarters, the damp darkness of the first true dungeon, the Water Shrine, the haziness of the worshipping area, the foggy cliff forest, the ethereal feel of the magic laboratory, and even the look of cold isolation in the snowstorm plains. There are so many memorable and visually pleasing areas, at times reminding me of the variety present in Dark Souls 2. And yes, I'm going to try to cut down on the modern FromSoftware comparisons in this video, but if I do slip up, apologies in advance. Aside from that, the look of the spell cast justly displays its elements. The NPCs have a unique look to them, and honestly, Cain Morgan's pretty memorable to me. I like his drip, got sweet hair. What a guy. Music and sound. Holy crap. So first off, let me start by saying that the sound effects and design get the point across. I don't think it's the best immersive sound design or anything like that, but it's not bad, and in fact it's pretty good. But the soundtrack? My god. I'm not kidding when I say this. After this most recent replay, I might have this in the top 10 video game OSTs of all time. The composing team of Kiichiro Sagawa, Yuji Kanda, and Tsukasa Saito did an absolutely amazing job. Sagawa and Kanda respectively also worked on other FromSoft projects from this time, while Saito's involvement continues on to this day, most recently with Armored Core 6 and Elden Ring. There are just so many banger tracks to shout out here, it's actually overwhelming. The intro's a banger, the prologue's a banger, Arriving to the Island is a banger, the boss theme called Hangs by a Thread is probably my favorite track in the entire game. The Cliff Forest is so relaxing, which is funny because it's one of the harder parts of the game, so I guess it's a good trade-off. The music in the Disposal Valley slaps, the ring-making music is so haunting and dreamy, the mines go way harder than it should, the Water Dragon theme gives me goosebumps each time I hear it, the Magic Laboratory feels triumphant, the Tower of Storms has me dancing like this. Honestly, I probably could name almost every track in this game and I'm not kidding. What an absolutely captivating and memorable soundtrack, perfect for the PS2, it also perfectly encapsulates Eternal Ring, and I can't get enough. If there's anything that you can get out of this video, I highly recommend that you listen to the soundtrack. Controls. So those that aren't familiar with Eternal Ring but are familiar with King's Field might have been waiting for this section of the review. I got good news and bad. If you hate the clunky nature of King's Field, that isn't present in Eternal Ring. Eternal Ring is way faster, way more fluid, and feels zippy. Funny enough, apparently the Japanese version of Eternal Ring, your normal walk speed is that of you holding the X button down in the North American release of Eternal Ring, so you basically walk at a Kingsfield-like pace in that one. The way this is countered is you actually do get a ring, I believe after the first boss, that will speed up your movement, but thankfully that was left in Japan. I could not imagine playing this game so slowly. And much like the fast movement, menuing is also extremely fast and fluid in this game. Even if you make mistakes, you could easily reset yourself and do what you need to do. My only real gripes with the controls are regarding the version that you're playing. If you're playing on the PS2, there are a few different control type layouts, but in general it's more Kingsfield-like by using the shoulder buttons and D-pad to move and aim. If you're playing on the PS4 or PS5 version, you could freely use the analog sticks for a smoother time. And since this game is so fast and chaotic at times, you can get easily turned around and lose your sense of direction during combat, also subsequently miss a lot of spell firings and so forth. So yeah, in general this is way more fluid than the Kingsfield series, and before any pitchforks come my way, check out my Kingsfield 1 through 4 coverage on my channel, I love those games. But Eternal Ring's change of pace was welcomed here. Gameplay and fun factor. As mentioned, the controls are faster, more free-flowing and fluid than that of the Kingsfield series. As such, combat is faster as well. The main difference between Kingsfield and Eternal Ring is an emphasis on magic as opposed to melee. Melee can still be very viable, but magic takes the cake. Gone completely is the physical attack meter from Kingsfield, and instead there's just a soul magic meter, where it needs to be all the way filled up in order to cast your spell. And to be fair, Kingsfield had this as well. Speaking of the game being magic-centric, in order to use spells, you need to create and or possess magic rings. Said magic rings are broken down into a few categories. You have attack rings, assist rings, and summon rings. These are all crafted in the ring creation areas that are present throughout the game by using a magic ring as a base and combining a bunch of gems that you typically find by killing enemies and getting drops. The gems make up the following elements: fire, earth, wind, water, light, and dark, and thus create elemental rings. There are also attribute rings which get created at ring creation areas, but they do not require a magic ring foundation. These types of rings, for example, are like the Ring of Heat, which slightly increases your fire attribute. Lastly, there are auxiliary rings, which are tied to the elements, but are found and not crafted. Rings such as the Clarity Ring, which makes your spell meter recharge faster. If you were to obtain every ring in the game, you would have 100 rings. Now, the crafting of rings can be a bit tricky, which I will cover a bit in the critique section, and if you're looking for a crafting guide, well, this isn't your video. It's also worth mentioning that the elemental gems double as currency in the game and can be used at the few vendors to buy various items, most of which are of the healing variety, whether it be HP, MP, or status ailments, and the few weapons that can be purchased throughout the game as well. And realistically, as far as the core gameplay goes, that's it. Fast-paced combat, revolving around ring creation, using said rings in battle to cast magic, traversing areas, acquiring things like keys to advance, talking to NPCs, and naturally fighting bosses. Tying back into the 100 rings and creation system is the general completionist style and or replay value that Eternal Ring possesses. Because it is so fast-paced, because there are so many rings and instances of backtrack looting, such as later in the game after acquiring the Ring of True Sight, which allows you to find hidden magic rings in various areas, there's actually quite a lot to do, and a lot can be done fast. You can also outright skip areas like the Cliff Forest if you aren't looking to grab all the loot. It's also worth mentioning that later in the game, once you create your first light or dark ring spell, you can gain access to a 4-floored sealed labyrinth back near the very beginning. This labyrinth boasts patented FromSoftware difficulty, no save spots, but has excellent and borderline game-breaking loot if you are down for the peril. If you want to see more of that stuff, I recommend checking out my YouTube shorts, which I will also leave in the pinned comment description below. Eternal Ring also has a day-to-night cycle, which has more to it than it appears. On the surface, it seems pretty meaningless outside of passage of time. Dusk to dawn graphical scenarios, an instance where a vendor is sleeping, a guard at the headquarters is off duty, and a few spots where the music changes between day and night like the tree hideout hub. And honestly, I'm not going to take credit for this, because there's no way I would have figured any of this out without some intense deep dive for the game, which I clearly don't have the time for. So shout out to Gunji in Lobos Jr.'s comments section. I'm also pretty sure they're part of the Eternal Ring Discord, so props again. Apparently the day to night cycles tie into the different elements and as such play into the enemy's defense. This is something that you probably won't notice much at all since Eternal Ring is not super difficult, but where you can notice it is in the ring crafting. The wind, light, and fire gems are used for offensive rings and they stand for the daytime elements, whereas earth, dark, and water are used for support rings and they stand for the nighttime elements. Again, not going to take credit for this, thought it was just interesting to note, and once more shout out to Gunji. In general, Eternal Ring is just a blast. You could zip through, you could take your time and grind for drops, craft rings to your heart's content, there's optional content, you could do a variety of challenge runs such as confining yourself to a certain ring element, or even melee only. But as you know, regardless of how much I like a game, their critiques must go on, so allow me to get nitpicky, as well as state a few legitimate grievances. Critiques. I'm going to start this section with some completely subjective critiques. And truthfully, I don't really know where I stand on them at times, but they are relevant. Since Eternal Ring is so much faster than that of Kingsfield, it can be hit or miss with me. Sometimes I like it, sometimes I don't, and I prefer the slower, plodding, melee-oriented combat of the Kingsfield series. One of the gripes that I do have with the fast-paced nature of Eternal Ring is during some intense combat sections it can become very easy to get turned around, and in areas like the Disposal Valley or Cliff Forest you can quickly lose your way. While having a multitude of rings to craft and collect gives good variety and possible challenge run or replay value, I will admit that there are a lot of rings that you flat out just don't need in any capacity. The truth about the magic system is it can be very similar to that of Kingsfield, where wind magic is overpowered as hell, again. Get yourself some good wind magic attacking rings, wind attribute rings, and an auxiliary ring or two and you're basically set. The difficulty of the game could also be off-putting to some. I personally don't find many of the old FromSoftware games to be too punishing as long as you're careful and decently skilled, but it definitely feels to me that Eternal Ring is considerably easier than that of Kingsfield. Yeah, there are a few tough spots. I referenced the Cliff Forest earlier, definitely challenging, as well as the Sealed Labyrinth, but otherwise not so bad. Many of the bosses are sort of pushovers, and even some of the tougher enemies in the game have insanely easy patterns to diagnose, such as the Bone Fencers. Now I want to get into some of my critiques that are bordering less on subjective and more objective. Eternal Ring is a pretty short game, especially if you know what you're doing. I'm aware that speedruns can make almost any game feel short to a certain extent, but this one definitely feels short even casually. A huge part of this, aside from the difficulty, is the fact that Eternal Ring is insanely linear. Sure, there can be moments of backtracking, you can get lost in a few areas, but it's relatively point A to point B, especially towards the end of the game. I was having a blast on my most recent replay through, but I was quickly reminded that the end of the game does feel rushed. Areas such as the ruins and the library leave a lot to be desired, and I felt like the further along I got in the game, the more broken it felt. For example, in the ruins you have to deal with Hawkmen enemies shooting arrows at you from God knows where through the walls. The same could be said in the Sealed Labyrinth area, granted it's optional, but there are a few cockatrices on level 3 that could shoot their magic from seemingly very far away and also through walls. In the final area of the game, the Eternal Dimension, while atmospheric, also felt incredibly drab, and there really wasn't much going on. The Bone Fencers have a chance to drop various dragon items, and there's a hidden true sight ring of magic by the corpse of a certain NPC, but otherwise, that was that. So again, while atmospheric, pretty bland. Another topic we have to touch on is the ring creation system in Eternal Ring. Without the use of a guide, especially if you're going for a complete ring collection, it can be very confusing. And even with the use of a guide, I was still finding myself creating rings that, according to my calculations, should have not been the end result that they were. A great example on my most recent playthrough are the summon rings. I was trying to create the Fire Dragon summon ring, which requires all 6 slots to be filled with Fire Dragon gems, which are of the level 5 or 5 points apiece variety. And the game decided to create the Fire Attack ring called Bomber, which is made by using fire gems equal to 20 points. After that, I made a save since I was running out of Fire Dragon gems, decided to try again, and on the second attempt the Fire Dragon ring was created. I also don't know if it was just a glitch because the attack rings, assist rings, and summon rings seem to be pretty straightforward, but it did happen. And then there's the attribute rings, which don't require a ring of magic base. There are plenty of mixed elemental attribute rings, and there is definite RNG involved. When I was doing my 100% run after writing this review, I ended up doing the same combo of magic gems over and over and over, yielding different results each time. So yeah, doing a 100% ring run, I did it, and I did it legit, can be very frustrating. And I would also be remiss if I did not mention the voice acting. There are some instances of it being legendarily bad. Two prime examples of this are the fisherman on the boat at the beginning of the game, although honestly I find it funny now, and towards the end of the game with Solus, where honestly, I still don't find it funny. It's incredibly annoying. And guess what? If you don't like it, too bad, you can't skip any of these cutscenes. Cut content? While putting together my review, I also found quite a few screenshots of what appears to be cut content from Eternal Ring. I just wanted to highlight it quickly because I felt like it would be fun to show off. A few of these screenshots look similar to Kingsfield 4 in the enemies known as living statues, but they are quite different. And to hammer the point home, this one photo from IGN has a FromSoftware Eternal Ring watermark on said photo. These enemies in this area definitely do not appear in the final release of the game. And honestly, probably for the better. As cool as it looks, it's way too Kingsfield 4 the Ancient City-like compared to the atmosphere of Eternal Ring. Also, does this dragon appear in the main game? I don't remember seeing this. It almost looks like the Dark Dragon, but it's spewing fire and has electricity on it? Is this the same dragon that's under the ice in the snowfield plain? To do a little bit more research, I took a look at a few Japanese trailers for Eternal Ring, and I couldn't find any of these things in there either, so I don't know. But anyway, just wanted to share. In summation, despite its shortcomings, Eternal Ring has earned a solid place in my gaming heart upon my revisiting of the Island of No Return. It's a beautiful game with varying scenery, solid character, NPC, and enemy design, one of the greatest soundtracks I've ever heard, a very interesting but semi-flawed magic or ring system, a decent enough story, intriguing opportunity for challenge runs and replay value, and with a bit more old-school FromSoft exposure over the last few years, I have an increased respect and love for Eternal Ring. Years ago I gave Eternal Ring a 7 out of 10, but now I give it a 8.75 out of 10. And I will admit that I am wrapped up in my own personal Eternal Ring hype, and I will be revisiting it shortly for a 100% run, or at least I'll try, and I want to tackle all the achievement challenges on retroachievements.com. If you've enjoyed this review, please consider liking, commenting, and subscribing if you haven't already. If you want to see my most recent playthrough of Eternal Ring, check out the pinned comment description below. Same goes for my old review. I also have some YouTube short content for it, and stay tuned for more Eternal Ring content here in the near future. Take care.